But in a situation where you find that a person look at the same,
not necessarily tribal or regional.
I have said that.
Welcome back to Daybreak right here on Trust TV. At this moment, we'll take a look at the front pages of the newspapers to see what's making the news this morning. We'll start with Daily Trust newspaper, where we have slim pickings, actually. The solitary headline on the front page of the Daily Trust reads, States FCT to spend over 11.5 trillion naira in 2023. And two riders here, it says projections merely yearly rituals. According to experts and banks, others must be wary granting loans to outgoing governors. Details of that story can be found on page 4. Well, the rest of the front page is taken over by pictorials here showing the APC presidential campaign rally in Kano State. So that's what we have for the Daily Trust newspaper this morning.
Interesting. It was all smiles for the APC candidates yesterday. I think the crowd have a way of bringing out a beautiful smiles from the candidates.
Exactly.
Moving on to the leadership newspaper this morning, which has several servants on the front page, but with the major story there. Alteration of 2023 budget. FG at crossroads says debt profile may hit 72 trillion. Decries 6 trillion lost to tax waivers. Says stamp duty allegations still under investigation. And exchange rate may go above 1,000 to $1. And that is according to Professor Pat Utomi. And moving on to other stories there on the front page, I will serve Nigeria with all my heart. Tinubu assures Nigerians. That will be coming out from Kano, and you'll find the details of that on page 7. And to other stories, another first caste eminent as Nupeng threatens nationwide strike. I mean, it's too early to serve us this breakfast. To other stories, after 4 years, FG inaugurate new NDDC board. Asset declaration, court stops probe, arrest of INEC chairman. I was just laughing with Ibrahim behind the scenes. It appears that every Caesar of a major organization in Nigeria is under the radar of the DSS, you know. And DSS arrests masterminds of Kogi explosion. And to other stories, PDP on the edge as G5 governors meet in Oyo. And Bauchi Emirates sacks kingmaker for disrespecting Bala Muhammad. You find these and other stories on the front page of Leadership.
All right, next we'll take a look at the Daily Times, and it goes with the major story on the front page. 2023 budget deficit, FG to further increase Nigeria's debt profile by 11.34 trillion naira. And it comes with riders here as debt servicing gulped 80.6% of federal government's revenue in 2022, and to stop payment of fuel subsidy by June 2023. Other stories on the front page. Ngige tackles Obasanjo for criticizing Buhari in letters to Nigerians. And the writer here says Atiku, Tinubu, Obi, Kwankwaso are good candidates with cognate experience in governance. And that is on page 2. Why Buhari couldn't remove fuel subsidy, and that's credited to Adeshino. And that's another story on the front page of the Daily Times. And at the very bottom of the front page there, defense security sectors to get 13.4% of 2023 budget. Details of that on page 3. And on page 20 of the Daily Times, CAS Amao reshuffles NAF administration, and DSS arrests ISWAP commander in Kogi. And at the very top of the front page there, court stops DSS, police, CCB from investigating INEC boss's alleged false asset declaration. Now, these are the major stories on the front page of the Daily Times newspaper this morning.
Moving on to the Nation newspaper, there with the major headline, Tinubu, Shatima, APC chiefs shut down Kano. Of course, you see the pictorials there to support what is shut down. It was yesterday at the Sani Abacha Stadium, if I'm not mistaken. Ex-Lagos governor promises to serve Nigerians, and progressive governors will deliver at post, says Bagudu. EFCC secures 3,785 convictions, and Nupeng threatens strike. As we have seen from other papers. CBN 1.355 trillion, Polaris Bank says most competitive. Akinjide Oyelese, Bolaromi in work for Atiku. Air Force redeploys branch chiefs, AOCs, and NDDC barred from awarding contracts above limit. And to other stories there, governors target 8.2 trillion from non-oil sector. Government, sorry. Petrol subsidy to cost 3.3 trillion in 6 months. And Wike confident of victory for his preferred presidential candidate, whatever that means. These are the major stories on the front page of the Nation newspaper.
All right, next we'll take a look at the blueprint. And of course, in keeping with what we have seen so far, it talks about the budget. Fear of 77 trillion naira debt for Buhari's successor worries experts. And the writers here actually take a look at what those experts are saying. If NAS OK's 23 trillion naira CBN loan bond swap, debt will rise. That is according to the DMO. And higher cost in servicing, drawback on capital projects infrastructure, says Idakolo. Huge debts will negate workers' salaries and welfare, says Adefolari, and cautions on arbitrary political appointments by incoming president. No debt restructuring, federal FG meeting obligation, says Minister. And our details of the story can be found on page 6. Moving down to the bottom of the front page there, DSS NAB suspected Okene explosion mastermind Abdul Mumin Otaru. That is on page 7. On page 20, sale of Polaris Bank, CBN berates misleading publication, sets records straight. And on page 13, you'll find a story, Lagos stops 3,785 EFCC's conviction in 2022. SEC laments proliferation of illegal investment entities on page 20, and analysts predict further Naira devaluation. And still talking about stories on front of the Blueprint newspaper, 52 days to polls, INEC receives last batch of BVAS. And on page 15, you'll find a story that has been making the rounds. Bauchi Emirate removes Kingmaker, Kirfi over disrespect for Bala, and daughter resigns from PDP-led cabinet. On page 7, you'll find a story talking about health. New COVID-19 variants not in Nigeria. That is according to the NCDC. And circling back to politics, Tinubu tackles Atiku on integrity, says PDP candidate can't keep promises, and pledges quick completion of Lagos-Kano rail project, and flaunts Buhari's achievements in 7 years. Now, these are the major stories on the front page of the Blueprint newspaper.
And moving on to the Nigerian News Direct with some interesting offerings there. But starting with the central bank, sales of Polaris Bank, we followed due process. CBN says Fairview did not make binding purchase offer. We have other stories there. Corruption, EFCC secures 3,785 convictions in 2022, highest since inception. And shake-up in Nigerian Air Force. And to other stories, Kwara government challenges Iola Oyedepo to public debate, over 337 billion revenue claims. FG spends 5.24 trillion for debt servicing in 2023. Go after killers of Fanny Toys, Abiodun tells police. And to the front page editorial there, Oyetola's 14 billion handover note, a challenge for governors and public officials. These are the major stories on the front page of the Nigerian News Direct.
All right, next newspaper we're looking at is This Nigeria newspaper, and the major story on the front page is 2023 Southeast is flashpoint to watch. Next year, public policy analysis experts raise alarm. Says IPOP internal strife, fight for dominance may disrupt election. And still talking about This Nigeria newspaper, no one can intimidate me from my choice of presidential candidate. That is according to Wiki, and that story can be found on page 13. EFCC secures 3,785 convictions in 2022. And at the very bottom of the front page there, DSS arrests ISWAP commander, others over Kogi bomb blast during Buhari's visit. Details of that can be found on page 7. And finally, on This Nigerian newspaper, FG to spend 3.36 trillion naira on petrol subsidy until mid-2023. Details of that on page 15. Now, those are the major stories on the front page of This Nigeria newspaper. And of course, with that, we we round up reeling out those headlines, and of course right now it's time for us to take perspectives on those particular headlines that we've just looked at. And of course we have our guest reviewer right here in the studio. Do I call him a guest? Do I call him? He's almost reaching co-anchor status right now, talking about Nasser Lawal, and it's very nice to have you on Daybreak, as usual.
Yeah, good morning. Good to be here.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so Sunday, and you like to take this one.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you again.
Yes.
In what appears like a beautiful morning. Daily Trust has just two offerings on the front page. The first one, it appears that we have always paid attention to the federal budgets, and we don't exactly take too much time to scrutinize what the states are doing, and in a way, it sort of gives them a leeway. They are set to spend another 11.5 trillion. You know, if you add that to the national budget, we'll be talking of over 30 trillion as a country. But the experts are saying these projections are just merely rituals as far as the states are concerned, and they are even asking banks to be wary of granting loans to outgoing governors. What do you make of this story?
Well, actually, there is a possibility of this figure actually going up because some of the states are actually yet to sign, or some of the state assemblies are actually yet to pass the budgets. And sometimes, you know, they find a way of increasing one or two things. And so we may end up with a figure that is probably higher than this. But like you said, so many states are actually getting away with murder, literally, you know, because all the attention seems to be on the center. So because of that, what is actually taking place in some of the states are not given the attention that they actually deserve. Sometimes when the state executives, you know, take the budgets to the legislators, what they do is basically just go through it and then stamp their approval. They don't do as much as follow up on all the issues, how the monies are going to be generated,
budget defense
and things like that. Yeah, sometimes they pass the budget in maybe very few days, 2-3 hours, you know, and because there is nothing they can add, because unless the governor wants that, nobody wants to toe that line. So because of that, you see, maybe when they find a way of increasing the budget, is just a way to accommodate one or two things that they want, which somehow did not make it to the budget. And one interesting thing that you will find in it is the fact that most of the things they are budgeting for is actually to pay salaries. And somehow they have found a way of increasing, you know, the amount that they allocate to capital projects. But in the end, if you look at all the things that they are talking about, you know, it's money being paid to contractors and what have you. So it's just to pay salaries. And even though the states are the ones who are coming up with this, they find it difficult to execute it to the latter, because it will be expected that if a governor is coming up with his proposals, you know, his estimates, things that he intends to do, he should be able to follow up on it. But you will find that at the end of the day, that so many things will be left undone, which is quite unfortunate.
Well, there's something actually that bothers me a little bit, and I don't know how we're going to get out of this present situation. We're going into an election year. Some of these state governors are not coming back, just like we have it on the presidential side. The president is not coming back. We're going to have a new president. A budget has actually been made. A new person is definitely coming in. How much wiggle room does that person have to actually say, okay, fine, I want this to be done, I want that to be done, I want to do this, I want to tweak this, I want to tweak that, because the budget has already been done, it has already been passed, and he's not the person who's making the budget is not the one implementing it. Yeah, you understand. So how does this really work? How does the dynamic work, both at the federal and state levels?
Well, if you look at it, the governors and even the president, like you rightly said, that are on their way out, they will be leaving on in May, you know, on the 29th of May. And that's like 5 months into there. So there are so many things that they will have to supervise over before the coming of the incoming administration. So because of that, they will have to make a plan. You know, they will have to start something. Of course, the person coming in may be at a loss as to where, you know, that will take him, because it will make it difficult for him to start like hit the ground running, because one of the arguments he may make is to say that you know, this budget that is currently in operation is not, I don't even have any input in it. So because of that, maybe we'll have to wait until the next year.
Even though we've wasted almost a year.
Yeah, and even though we have, he has a right, you know, to send supplementary budget, to call for a review, and so many other things. But it's just something that, you know, is part of governance. They just have to do it. Like I remember the president saying that they have made adequate provision for the 2023 election. They have also made provision for a number of things that, you know, will be happening under his watch before he leaves on the 29th of May.
Okay.
Interesting conversations there around the budget. We have a loaded package for you as the show goes on. That will be dissecting issues around the budget and other sundry issues surrounding it. But moving on to the next issue, which also dominated the front page of the Daily Trust, would be the APC outing in Kano yesterday. Here on the front page, it said unprecedented crowd shuts down Kano. I mean, we saw that the Sani Abacha Stadium was filled to capacity, and we saw some frontliners there of the APC campaign council standing there on the stage with the chief runner, Bola Ahmed Tinubu. Yeah. You saw the pictures emanating from Kano yesterday. How would you situate what happened in Kano, you know, in the face of everything that has happened in the last 2-3 days, the Obasanjo's letter, the attack and counter attack vis-a-vis? I mean, the APC people were saying that this is this crowd sort of responds to the Obasanjo's letter. What's your take on this?
Well, I would also want to believe that actually the crowd was massive. But if you know how Kano is, there are certainly parts of Kano that didn't even know something like this was actually taking place. And in as much as politicians want to make, you know, all the noise about having a huge turnout, you know, to their events, one thing you will want to ask, you know, how many of these same people, you know, will be there when your rival will also be there. So because rightly or wrongly, some of the things that people are saying is the fact that people are being paid to actually attend these rallies. So it's on the 25th of February, you know, that you will know whether the people you saw at your event were actually, you know, maybe eligible voters, and whether they will be voting for you or not. But I will not begrudge them what they see as a very big success, you know, because coming just a few days after the missile from the former president, you know, I think it's something that they will want to celebrate.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's move slightly away from that. Earlier we were discussing in the studio about the sanctity of our traditional institutions, and there's this story making the rounds about a traditional title holder being removed because of alleged disloyalty or disrespect to the governor. What does this mean for, because we've seen incidents like this before, I mean, like emirs being deposed because of a certain disagreement with governors and the rest of it. What does this mean for our traditional institutions? We always said that we need to protect traditional institutions, we need to guarantee their neutrality and their independence and their sanctity. But if things like this continue to happen, what does this mean for them?
Well, I will blame the traditional institution for some of the things that are actually happening. You know, because anytime you have a new governor, anytime you have, you know, a politician becoming not necessarily popular, but just being achieving some form of fame, you know, they will want to confer him with a title also. So it's like telling them that we are at your service, you know. All the calls that they have been making of, you know, having a constitutionally assigned role, you know, it will come to nothing if they are being treated this way. And if you look at what happened in Bauchi, you know, it's interesting in the sense that in 2017, this same person was suspended by the then Governor Mohammed Abubakar, and he was reinstated by the present governor in 2020, I think. And now the same governor is the one behind his ordeal. And you can see what Nigerians are like saying. So many people will say blood is thicker than water. His daughter has already resigned. You know, resigned. She didn't say that was the reason, but we all know it had to do with it. So like I said, the governors should respect the traditional institutions because they always run to them whenever they have one or two problems that they want them to help in solving. So I remember even during the Abacha regime, you know, when they were to sack the then Sultan of Sokoto, the way they went about it, and the fact that they are saying traditional rulers should actually be reporting to the local government chairman,
exactly.
You know, and that's a huge contradiction because let me give you an example, and let me use the late Ado Bayero, for instance, in Kano. Who among the 44 local government chairmen in Kano will, you know, have that audacity to even look you know, at the emir in the face and start suspending him? You know, it's just unthinkable. It's something that may not happen. But because they don't have any role in the constitution, and then they also rely solely on the government for their upkeep and things like that, then the government continues to take them for a ride, which is honestly not the best. If we are looking at the role that they play, which is very, very important, even if it is just to be the custodians of our culture, like people will say, we should find a way of respecting them. True. But you also know, like I said earlier, we are giving all sorts of people traditional titles. Some of them are politicians, and you can't stop a politician, you know, from engaging in politics.
Exactly.
Whether he does that in the public eye or he does that behind the scenes, he will play politics. So that's one thing we should also find a way of. What if the same person is doing the same thing to the rival of the governor? Do you think the governor will take that action? He will not, because it's things that, you know, affect them that they are usually particular about. And honestly, I think this is the right time, you know, to find a way of giving the traditional institutions some form of autonomy, so that you won't wake up the next day and be reading in the newspaper that you are no longer the traditional title holder that you used to be.
Obviously, and for those who know about Bello Kirfi is actually a big name, and has been in the public eye for so long. And these have implications clearly for politics and all. But moving on to Kogi State, today we are hearing the DSS telling us that they arrest an ISWAP kingpin. At first, authorities were denying the fact that it was even a bomb blast. They kept saying it's a transformer, it's a transformer. They didn't want that story to rob the shine of the president's visit and the commissioning of that gigantic hospital. And now it does appear like it's a script. Every time something big happens, 2 days later they will tell us a commander has been arrested. We don't get to see these commanders. They don't get to show us, as we see with foreign news. I mean, we saw the last bombing in the US. We probably would not expect something as sophisticated as the US. But during the briefings, they go the extra mile to tell us from their preliminary findings how these attacks were orchestrated, who and who were involved, who provided ancillary services, you know, to sort of give the idea that they've nipped it in the bud, or they are ahead of time. I mean, we just have a situation where they either bring out den guns or bring out some persons. We don't get the opportunity to interrogate, and they give them all kind of baptismal names. and the issue goes out of the press. How long are we going to continue to rely on what appears to be a strategy that doesn't engender confidence at all?
Well, you know, it has always been reported. It has always been in the news. The fact that there is an active terrorist cell in that axis, and they are said to be responsible for some of the things that are actually happening within and around the FCT. But you know, like you observed, sometimes the states will come out and say, no, nothing like that happened. So you wonder, what are they afraid of? Because when you are like transparent about it, the people will now respect whatever you come out to tell them in the future. But in the beginning, you denied that nothing like that happened. And now we are seeing those that are, you know, said to be the mastermind of the explosion being arrested by the DSS. And some of the things that the DSS actually said in its statement, maybe are things that they should be able to present before a competent court of law, so that in the end, you know, all their arguments, all their cases will be made, and then they will be able to convince whoever is the judge to hand out, you know, the appropriate sentence. But to sometimes give out all this information, you know, it amounts to like a media trial and what have you. I understand that there is always a pressure, you know, to show the people that you are actually working. But in doing that, nothing stops you from, like, even in the US, they leak information.
They do.
You know, you can do that without necessarily coming out to say, to give out all the information at your disposal. Because the moment you start doing that, you are now giving the criminals the opportunity to start preparing for their own argument. And they may, before you know it, they will be able to pinpoint one or two loopholes, and they may cash in on that. And they will make nonsense of all the prosecution and what have you. But I hope this is going to be different. I mean, by saying it's going to be different, the DSS will take it to a logical conclusion. We'll see the suspects being arraigned in court, you know, having their day in court, and then being handed out the appropriate punishment that they rightly deserve.
All right. Well, another story making the rounds is the number of EFCC convictions that have been secured. That's 3,700 and something. That's almost 4,000 convictions. So how are we to look at this now? Are we to look at it in a position whereby to say, okay, the EFCC is efficient, they're working, they're getting these convictions and all that? Or should we say this higher number signifies the rot in society, that corruption has taken a root in our society? How do we look at it?
Well, even though I wouldn't want to belittle their achievement or what they see as an achievement, honestly, most of these convictions that they are talking about, you know, things that, you know, that the public hardly pays attention to. Compare that to convicting, you know, maybe a former governor, you know, a former head of an important agency. When you are able to do that, you know, the message that you will be sending with that just one conviction will, you know, outshine all these 3,700, you know, convictions that you are talking about. Because, like I said, some of these convictions that they are talking about, is it internet fraud?
Fraud, 419.
You know, 419 and what have you. So, while not belittling their achievements, like I said, actually, they should try to see how they will be able to take all the big cases, you know, to logical. There are so many cases that have been dragging on for years, and nobody seems to know what is at which stage.
Some of them like peter off, and you don't hear about them again
anymore. And you know, sometimes they will go to the courts, you know, make arguments in a way that the judge will just dismiss the whole thing, because maybe we have not been doing the due diligence that you will expect. And one thing with the internet fraud, you know, once there is a victim, it's not difficult to be able to know, what transpired between the criminal and then his victim. But like I said, they should be able to come up with big, convictions, so that when they do that, the right message will be sent that nobody is actually above the law. Because the one that you will catch, somebody that just stole a goat, and then confine him to detention for God knows when, and then all the people that can't even account for the open display of wealth, and we know they are not businessmen, they are not in any productive ventures, but they are in open display of wealth, and they are like, all over the town, nobody is saying anything. And then we are talking about convictions, convicting of almost 4,000.
Interesting. Yeah. I was reading somewhere online where somebody says when they reach a court, they tell you their corruptions are alms giving. They're not corruption. Moving on, another interesting story that seemed to have made one or two front pages would be the court stopping the arrest or probe of the INEC chairman. It appears that the DSS, if you like, another security agencies, have not perfected the acts of using studio addresses and names to go after heads of institutions that seem to be material, especially to the forthcoming election. I mean, the central bank governor has been playing hide and seek for a couple of days over this series of attempts to effect an arrest, and now we see the INEC chairman now becoming a center of attraction. Nobody saw this coming. From nowhere, with stories about them receiving the final badges of the beavers, to now having a court stopping the police, stopping the DSS, as we saw, something similar to what we saw with the central bank governor. What are these? What does this signpost? Would it be politicians trying to play on all arms, or this is just a natural course of events taking place at this time?
Well, there were reports that so many people were not comfortable with the current INEC chairman supervising
the next election,
the 2023 election. But I think the court did a good thing in the fact that, the man will not be distracted. If you have any case against him, nobody is saying that he should be above the law. But to wait 1-2 months, I don't think that's a big problem. But sometimes the way they go about it, honestly, it leaves much to be desired. Like if you see the CBN issue we just made mention of, he is reporting to the president. Yes. You are equally reporting to the president. If you are able to present your case before the president, you wouldn't have to go through all these back channels, like you rightly observed. Because why should you do that? It seems to give the impression that it's either the president may not get the idea of what you want to pass unless you go through the courts, or the CBN governor has succeeded in blocking all the channels that you have to the president, which does not speak well of the administration. So like I said, the court did well. I hope this is not going to be like a perpetual injunction, so that nobody will have the right
immunity through the back door.
Yeah, to go back to the case again. But if we look at the moment and then the elections that we are about to have, honestly, we shouldn't have rooms for all these distractions and what I'll do. So as far as I'm concerned, what the court did is the right thing.
All right. Okay. Well, on that note, I think it's a very good place to round up the discussion of the newspaper review for this morning. Nasrullah, thank you very much for coming on the show, as usual. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you for having me. I was actually concerned when I saw him wearing black. I actually felt like going back to
Well, I felt like going back to change mine. I'm feeling left out. Yes, I'm feeling left out. Yeah. All right, so it's always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you for the opportunity.
All right, so it's still Daybreak on Trust TV. We'll take a short break, and when we return, it will be top of the hour, and the show rolls on. Stay with us.
But in a situation where you find that look at the
not necessarily tribal or regional.
But I have said that